Hello and welcome to another Melbourne AWS user group. It is somehow September already in 2021, and like September for us most years tends to be a quiet meetup. It turns out that most of our presenters decided not to show up this week. So while we still track down, see if we can track down Hendra, who is our main presenter for tonight, we thought we'd kick off so that you're not still left sitting there waiting for us. We can at least roll through the news and Ian's lightning talk if we need to, and fingers crossed our main speaker shows up and joins the call sometime before then. If not, we'll have a quiet evening and we'll get ready for next month. Now, just before I kick into the agenda, I thought it would be good to mention, now that the Victorian government has released their roadmap, it's very, very unlikely that we will be having any in-person meetups this year. There's no real space in the whatever now for the 80% vaccinated milestone that leaves room for an event like ours to be held in person. So unless something happens in November where we get relaxed restrictions quickly all of a sudden, which is, judging by history, doesn't seem very likely, then we'll just stick with virtual meetups for the rest of this year, and fingers crossed we can get back to in-person events in January, which would be nice. But to tonight's meetup, instead of thinking about the future, this side now. So if this is your first time here, welcome along. We have a bit of a disrupted schedule, so we had Dawn unfortunately cancelled this morning due to unforeseen circumstances, and we haven't been able to find Hendra, so we've got one presentation at the current point in time, which is Ian introducing Fog, and hopefully we can track down Hendra before the night's over, and we can listen to his one on transitioning Kafka on Graphitan 2. I don't know. English doesn't seem to be working for me today. And yes, so we may be wrapped up early. We'll see how we go. As I said, if this is your first night tonight, hey, we just had Hendra join the meetup. Hello, Hendra. Welcome along. We just had, yeah, so if this is new for you tonight, welcome along. The way we normally work is we encourage you to ask questions on, oh man, reset. You're encouraged to ask questions if you have any questions of our presenters tonight. That's generally the best way to get your questions answered, is to ask them. You can either ask them on our Slack channel, which will give you the details in a minute. You can ask them on Twitter using the AWS Melb hashtag, or you can ask them right there in the YouTube chat. What happens then is I'll jump on the stream with our presenter and I'll ask those questions on your behalf, and hopefully we can get them answered for you in a good level of detail. We also welcome any feedback that you might have. Again, same channels on Slack, via Twitter, or in the chat there on YouTube. Any and all feedback is good. Comments, questions, feel free to have a conversation right there in the chat. Our presenters often join the YouTube channel as well after they're finished, and you can continue to talk to them there. Now, we couldn't put these events on, even though they're virtual, they still take time and money and effort to run, and so a big thank you to our sponsors, including our gold sponsor, CMD, and our two silver sponsors, Versant and Sevo. Huge thank you to all three of you for your support throughout this year, and we look forward to that continued support for the rest of the year. Who are we? My name's Rob, if you haven't met me before. I usually go by @Bok on Slack and most social platforms. And my co-host, who you'll meet in a minute, is Ian. We don't work for AWS. None of the people you meet tonight will be working for AWS. We're all members of this community as well. AWS is our bread and butter, but we work in the ecosystem. We're not from the mothership. And that's a good thing, in that we can carry any opinions we like into this event. If you have some things you want to say about AWS that is not particularly glowing, we welcome that sort of feedback too. Whatever is valuable for the community is welcome here. Now, as mentioned before, you can find us on Slack. We have one of the larger Slack teams, especially tech-related Slack teams in the country, at 837 members at the moment, who are active at various points in the day. This is great for keeping in touch during lockdown. It's great for asking any questions you might have. It's great for talking about the new AWS products that were announced today, about any AWS product in general, really. And it's also a great place to go and find out what the hell's going on when there's an outage, or if you just want to talk what's new. That's one way to get involved. Other ways to get involved is to present. We welcome all speakers for any idea, big or small. If you have a 5-minute lightning talk about a cool tool that you found, that's welcome. And some of the best talks we've had have been that sort of thing. If you've just done some study and you've learned something new and you want to share that, we welcome those sorts of talks as well. It doesn't have to be a presentation that you spend hours on polishing and practicing and perfecting. It can really just be something small and off the cuff. Maybe you talk to a website or something like that, whatever you need. Sponsorship's closed for 2021. We'll reopen that again early next year. And we're always looking for volunteers to help out as well with the organization of the events. So a little bit about what else is coming up around the AWS communities at the moment. The Awesome Day conference is actually on tomorrow. It's a 1-day online conference, and this one is very much targeted as the introduction to AWS. So if this is your first meetup and you're very new to AWS, this is for you. The link is there on that. It runs all day tomorrow, and you can jump on and off the sessions. There's 4 sessions, I think, from memory, and they're all about getting started on AWS and taking those first steps on the journey. The other big one that happens every year, reInvent, is of course on again end of November. Won't be in person, unfortunately for us. If you're watching this from Australia, there apparently will be people in person from the US and probably other countries over there, which is going to be a little bit of FOMO going on, I think. But we'll see how AWS goes running a mixed online-offline event. It'll be interesting to see what they do. Go reinvent.aws.com, I think, off the top of my head. Register your interest if you haven't already. And I think that's everything that I have here. Yep. Back at the beginning? Yep. All right. So we will switch over to Ian and to Guy to talk about what's new in AWS.
Cool. Thanks, Rob. And hello, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
So, as you can see, I've got Guy with me today. And, well, let's dive into the news. It's been a bit better after a couple months of not much at all. So, let's have a look at finally in Sydney, or rather, finally in ANZ. We're getting a New Zealand region. Well, I say we, but it's New Zealand people who will be getting it.
Isn't it like, all the famous New Zealanders, like we claim them as Australians, like Russell Crowe and Neil Finn, like they're all Australians. So this will actually be the Australian East region, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Australian AP Middle Earth, I believe.
Yeah.
It was called by Rob.
Mm-hmm.
So that's cool.
Very exciting.
Still a long time away though.
Yeah, so New Zealand got CloudFront Edge locations about 12 months ago, which was, I think, well received, and it was one of the steps that, I guess, on AWS breaking ground in New Zealand. So I know that made a big difference to some things. Gave them Global Accelerator and CloudFront, obviously, in country. But yeah, it's definitely this is the big one, and there'll be a lot of excited AWS engineers in New Zealand, I'm sure.
Yep. In a couple of years, we'll have 3 regions that we can care about.
Yeah.
Exciting times.
It is.
Other things that got released here are customized reverse DNS for Elastic IPs.
Yep.
So this is the ability to set the reverse DNS for your Elastic IP. Basically, this is often used to identify that the source is indeed correct when you're making outbound calls.
Yeah, so especially for mail servers, so if you're running an SMTP server on a Elastic IP, a lot of other mail servers, before they are prepared to accept your email, they'll do a reverse DNS lookup on the IP it came from, and if it doesn't match the sending domain for the email, they'll reject it. So if you've been running your own EC2 based SMTP hosts on Amazon, this is definitely something you need.
Yep. Another one that was just released last month is the Elastic Cache for Redis autoscaling. Obviously, this is a good thing. Autoscaling is always better than needing to have static hosts. So now we can use that here as well.
Yeah.
Surprisingly quick.
Yeah.
It came here.
It's a good way to save some money if you're running some Redis hosts.
Yep. And the last one is a bit of a weird one. But there's pricing in Sydney for extract, analyze document, and detect document text calls are now the same as they are in US East 1, aka North Virginia. Yeah. So if you use that, that is good.
Yep. 32% cheaper, they say, than currently. So that's pretty handy saving.
Or it was overpriced here before.
or maybe both.
Maybe both. Yep.
That's right.
Yeah. Let's have a look at serverless stuff. Mm-hmm. Slightly disappointing how much there is there. Only cross-account event discovery for EventBridge for schema registry got added. And so it's basically the existing discovery piece, but now you can use it with different accounts.
Yeah.
And in addition,
So that's if you're getting events from another account, the event discovery can now discover the schema of those events as well as the ones originating in your own account.
Yep.
Yeah.
And amplify command hooks. This is basically allowing you to have custom things running on certain events within the Amplify build process.
Yeah. And the Aurora configurable auto scaling timeout, I had to go and look up what this meant. So auto scaling events look for a period of quiet time to execute. So what this timeout lets you do is set a timeout after which you can force a scaling event to happen. So if you actually need a bit more capacity, Serverless is going to wait for a moment of no activity to try and do that scaling event. So this gives you a way of basically forcing it to scale after a set period of time, between 1 and 10 minutes, I think.
Yep. Cool.
So if you're using Serverless, that's probably handy.
Yeah. Then, see a bad typo here, but anyway, on the container side, ECS Anywhere is GA. So if you remember, at around reInvent, ECS Anywhere was announced as a way to manage your EKS clusters from EKS. So this can be an on-prem cluster. This can be a self-managed EKS cluster. You can hook them up to EKS using EKS Anywhere, which is possibly a good thing. Something else here, though, that I personally think is more interesting is that using ECR, you can now replicate individual repositories to other regions and or accounts. This means that you can more easily have a centralized main repository for your ECR repos. Example of this, somewhere this might be useful is if you use Docker for Lambda, because that always requires that the repository is in the account you're running your Lambda from, which is something that makes no sense to me, but okay. And this way you can set it up that you can still have a centralized place where you build everything, then it gets automatically synced, and you can still deploy the same thing easily, so the same image to your different environments.
Mm. So there's a bit of a pattern emerging here with AWS enabling sync of useful things between regions. They did it with Secrets Manager, and what was the thing that they announced the other day? Last month.
KMS?
Yeah, that's KMS. That's right. So yeah, it's nice that they're undoing some of these kind of annoying restrictions that you previously had to write lambdas to copy things from here to here to here to here. Yeah, it's nice to see.
Cool. But moving on, we're going a bit slow today, so let's move it up a bit.
We're trying to pad. We don't need to pad anymore.
Nope.
Now we're getting the wind up.
Cool. Possibly my favorite announcement from this month. Well, technically it came out a couple days after our last meetup last month. Is a CloudFormation now allows you to retry from point of failure. What this means is, if you will be familiar, if you use CloudFormation and there is an error in one of the resources, it will then roll back the entire deployment. This is especially annoying if you're building a new stack. It has a failure after about an hour, takes another hour to roll back. And now you don't have to do that anymore. Now you can pass a flag when you deploy it, and it will then not roll back everything. It will just roll back the thing that failed and stop at that point, so you can fix the typo you made or whatever and continue.
Yeah.
This can literally save you hours of annoyance.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're given now 3 options on failure. You can retry. So, if you think that it's, let's say it's failing because there's a duplicate resource already in your account, you can go and delete that and retry from the point it failed. And that could be one way of fixing your problem. You can update the template. So you can either update the template or update a parameter value. So you can go in and change a parameter value that was not suitable, or you can go and fix some problem in the template and upload it again. Or you can just roll back, which is the behavior where we've grown to learn to love. So it's good. We've got three options now, which will be great.
Learn to love is a big word. Learn to live with is probably more accurate.
Yeah.
The other thing here then is Managed Grafana is now GA, so you can use that. I believe we discussed a couple months ago that Managed Grafana got a price decrease, so it became more usable, which is always a good thing. So check it out and see if that is useful for you.
Yep. And we can't leave the slide without saying Corrado 17 for Chris. That's
yep.
Big shout
we
out.
We need to keep Chris happy.
That's right. The other thing here that I thought was cool was the inconsistency detector in CodeGuru. That's kind of neat. It's using machine learning to find errors in your code that are actually just you being inconsistent in how you write it. So that's an interesting new sort of twist on the CodeGuru product.
Yeah, I'd be afraid to run that on my code, to be honest. So let's quickly move on. On the security side, interesting one is probably the ACM Private Certificate Authority supporting the Online Certificate Status Protocol, which basically it means that you can revoke certificates. So especially for if you use any of this for things like mutual TLS, it is useful if you can revoke a certificate, as in this one is now compromised, or we don't want to use this one anymore, and then it will actually mark it as such. So
yeah, so the advantage here is it gives you some real time, a real time status of the certificates, validity. Whereas I think the other methods that have sort of been around to date are not as well. They're harder to do. You need to use code to figure them out, and they can have cached values essentially, so they're not real time like this. Is the main advantage as I see it, I think.
Cool. And with that, quickly have a look at other cool stuff.
The VT1 instances are interesting, aren't they? They're sort of a sign of the time. So the VT1 instances are optimized for multi-stream video transcoding, and I guess with the pandemic, there's been a lot more demand for people streaming video. So these instances are set up with media cards for transcoding video faster. So more cost-effective way of doing that, achieving that job.
Yep. And announced just this morning, it's EC2 Global View. Now, if you go into the console, you can see that your specific, or you can get an overview of everything running in all of your regions. As Guy pointed out earlier today, though, if you don't have access to some of those regions, you'll get a lot of error messages.
Yeah, and because it polls, so it gives you info about your EC2 instances, your VPCs, your subnets, security groups, and volumes across all of the regions, which is really nice to have that sort of high-level dashboard view. But yeah, if it throws an error, it repolls every, I'm going to say, 10 minutes. So if you leave that screen open for a period of time, eventually the error messages push the content off the screen. But I'm sure AWS will fix that at some point.
Yeah, I'm sure. I think with that, we'll leave it at this so that we can get back to the main presentation. As always, Guy, as well as Jean-Manuel and I, will also be discussing all of this news in more detail for a lot longer at the User Groups podcast. So subscribe, watch it, whichever one you prefer.
Or both.
And or both. And with that, I'll hand it back to Rob.
Yep. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you, Ian. That was awesome. I'm kind of disappointed that you guys didn't mention Astro, though. I mean, I guess it's not technically AWS, but it is AWS adjacent. And I'm sure everybody wants one, right? This would be so useful while you're around the house all the time. No, maybe not. All right. Good news is Hendra has joined us. He's just getting his screen sharing permissions going now. One of the downsides for broadcasting the way we do is that not very many people use Skype anymore, which means that everybody has to install Skype for the first time in probably 10 years. and then go through the dance of setting up permissions inside the system preferences. No, I still can't see your screen yet. Just the desktop background. Yep, that sounds good. Sandra's just closing Skype and restarting because everybody loves doing that when they give permissions on their Mac. Could have had a whole section on Astro. That would have done some good adding. Oh, that looks good. We can see it now. Yep, we can. Are you good to go? Or hang on a sec, Kendra. I'll hand it over now.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming. Yeah, thanks for this opportunity that we can share. So my talk is not necessarily about introduction to how we are using the AWS stuff, but it's more about how we are transitioning to the new product of Graphitan 2 from the AWS. So as you probably are aware, previously there are Graphitan 1 instances. There are also x86 instances for EC2, and there's the new Graphitan 2, and that's essentially this transition to Graphitan 2 is what I'm going to mostly talk about. And before that, I'm going to briefly mention who I am. So currently I'm working in Insta clusters, which I'm based in Canberra, and working in Insta cluster means I'm interacting with AWS on a daily basis. And previously, before I worked here, I did my PhD in computer science, focusing on formal methods in software security, and also did a bit of postdoc in fuzzing. So yeah, so that background. With that background, actually the problem that I mentioned to you shouldn't even be a consideration. But anyway, that's a kind of like foresight, kind of like, yeah. So what's Insta cluster? So essentially, what we are is it's just we have a product like Cassandra, like Apache Kafka, OpenSearch, Redis, PostgreSQL, and we package that and manage that for you in the, say, in AWS EC2 instances. And we are at Insta clusters are pretty much open source, so we don't really have anything that's logged in for us. And the important stuff is we just want to make it easy for you to spin up clusters. And then the cluster already come packaged with the applications that you want. And in particular, because my team is pretty much Apache Kafka, then you will have a container or image with Apache Kafka built in. And previously, we have been using the x86 nodes. Pretty much with the switch to Graphitan 2, which is ARM architecture, means there's quite a bit of difference in the instruction sets. But the good thing about Apache Kafka is it's written in Java, so then it means technically everything should work well without much issue functionally. and a bit of an extra as well, because you run the applications, you need the disk, and of course we pair that with the disk offering for AWS. Previously we used GP2, and we are we are transitioning to GP3 as well. So yeah, Graphitan 2, it's new, it's shiny. It's the tagline is it's cheaper, and it more or less are equally powerful, if not more powerful. And for GP3, it's similar, kind of like it's cheaper. They can have higher throughput compared to GP2 disk. And the difference is, if you go down technically, GP2 disk, you have the number of IOPS limited by your disk sizes, and then when you want to go over the limit, then you have some sort of credits. Whereas for GP3, you can set the provision throughput, the throughput or bandwidth and IOPS at the price, and you already come with some free values there, and generally it's already higher than the GP2 limits. So before we start the whole journey, we heard about this. Oh yeah, don't use Graphitan 2 when you are using Java and network intensive, of which Kafka is of our main interest because of this problem. And turns out, oh, there's already someone solved the issue for us. So it sounds like, yep, we are starting to great starting point. We are moving to something cheaper. We are moving to something stronger. So what's not to like? So with that in mind, we changed how we provision the stuff to make sure that we can accommodate the new instruction set, and we also have the we want to do the benchmarking to make sure that we are not missing anything. So we compare EC2 instances that should technically have similar specs. By spec, I mean it's similar in number of cores, it's similar in the number of say the memory as well. So in this particular instance, I pick R5 large and compare it with the new Graphitan 2 R6G large. And because we want to make sure that we are just comparing the instances rather than the disk, I just set the maximum throughput and IOPS for GP3 disk, so to make sure that it's not the bottleneck. And at the time when I did the benchmarking, we are still on the Kafka 261. And one important aspect that will come useful later on is we turn on the client and broker encryption for communication. So great start. We have set up for benchmarking already, and then we do the benchmarking, and then I'm pretty much shocked because if you see the graph there, you see that there's a lot of the difference in the throughputs are pretty high. If you squint a bit, probably you can see the number, and it's about half. So the Graphitan 2 performance are way worse than the R5 performance, which is weird because Graphitan 2 should be better than the R5, and we can't really think of anything why it's wrong. And just to ensure myself that I didn't do something stupid or just some random variables, I did it several times. It comes back with consistent results in that the R6G large performance is about half of the R5 large. So initially, I just thought, yeah, maybe it's something simple that I did wrong, because what else can go wrong? So we just throw in a bunch of hypotheses, and then we spend a lot of time trying to think as to why this performance problem. So initially we thought, oh, maybe it's a difference in JDK, because previously we just used the stock standard JDK. there's this new Twitter saying we should use Corretto, we change to Corretto, and maybe that's the problem. Run the benchmark, same result. And then, maybe because previously we used GP2 disk and then now we move to GP3 disk, there's a problem. Same thing, run the benchmark, still a problem. And then probably it's isolated to just R5 large and R6G large. Maybe if we are comparing, say, C5s or C5 large or C5X large or even stronger instances, it may not be the case. Benchmark again, similar result, although the values are obviously different because it's a stronger result. Stronger instances. And grasping at the straws, we just we throw in the hypothesis, or maybe because Graphitan 2 is cheaper, we can add more nodes so that we have more computing power, or kind of like, if you like the fancy terminology, usually we use the horizontal scaling. Maybe we can do that to compensate. Run the benchmarking. There is a bit of performance increase, but it still doesn't answer the question as to why it's still way, as in the x86 instances, R5 large still perform way better. So after banging my head for quite a while, decided, well, we need to find out more information, right? Why this whole thing is bad, really. So we run. There is this talk from there is this talk somewhere about how we can profile the Java application. That's what I did, and it can produce these nicely looking flame graphs. And if you have a look, it turns out that the same, as in the same function here and there, the one that I highlighted, it takes, as in the JVM is spending much more time proportionally in that function in R6G large compared to the R5 large. So if we want to zoom in a bit to that particular part that I highlighted, so you see this particular function, you can compare side by side, and pretty much you can also get the sense of the difference, which is almost half. So that actually answers a lot of our question, because if you remember, the difference in the performance is also about half. So we get an idea. Oh, maybe it's actually the problem with the SSL. So we just turn off the client blocker encryption, runs the benchmarking again. You see that the performance of R6G large now it's actually a bit better than the R5 large, which corresponds to the tagline by AWS, and we are happy, of course. I mean, like, yeah, we find something great here. And then we asked the issue in the GitHub about getting started with AWS, and someone dig deeper and actually identified that the problem is actually in the JDK or JVM implementation in Graphitan, in ARM architecture. It doesn't have the native or the intrinsic implementation for AES GCM, and turns out that's the default for communicating in SSL when you set it on in Kafka, and pretty much AES is the gold standard for security for now. I mean, like, obviously it will change in the future, but I mean, like, the underlying problem remains in where we need more intrinsic implementations in JDK to make it parity with the x86 architecture. So great. I mean, like, the issue is raised upstream, and I think at the moment, while I'm writing this presentation, I checked that there's still no movement on when it will be fixed in JDK. But obviously, we can't just wait, right? I mean, like, we want to transition to the new product. we can't offer the customer the product that are less powerful. So we still need to find another solution. And then when we search around, there is these blogs on AWS, Amazon blogs on the Amazon Corretto. Turns out they have a drop-in crypto provider, which called the Amazon Corretto crypto provider. And the thing is, it's rather than implementing or doing the native stuff themselves, what this crypto provider does is it interface Java with JVM with the OpenSSL native implementation. So that solves our problem, because then we can compile the OpenSSL natively in ARM and in x86, and then we can just interface that with the JVM, and then we should be good with that. And now our Kafka image comes packaged with this crypto provider, and the thing is we want to make sure that it actually solves the problem, run the benchmark, and as you can see there, if you squint a bit, probably you can see that it's slightly better, not that much, but it's still slightly better, and that's the outcome that we want, right? Because previously, as the tagline said, if at least as strong, if not better. So that's the part about the problem in transitioning to Graphitan 2. And I think while we are at it, I'm thinking also about talking about because we pair the Graphitan 2 with the GP3 disk. So we did the benchmarking again and get the metrics out of the AWS. And as you can see, when you plot it, pretty much under pretty heavy load. There's not much IOPS, but the disk throughput is 600 there. Looks like it's flatlined there, even though the loads are different. So the reason for this one is actually if you go to the website AWS and see the list of instances, you will see the column there, EBS bandwidth, and this number 600 pretty much corresponds to the Okay, cool. So the last bit that I want to briefly mention is, if I haven't mentioned it or before I cut off, so if you compare the same instances with the same load but difference in the disk, one is using GP3 and one is using GP2, the one with GP3 disk will have a bit of better performance, just because there is a difference in the throughput. So the GP2 disk have a 250 megabytes per second throughput limitation, even though it's bursting using the credits. Whereas in GP3 disk, you can set it up to 1,000. But if you are just using the smaller instances, doesn't really make sense to set it to 1,000. As I mentioned in the previous slide, there's a limitation on the EBS bandwidth. That's something that you should check as well. So that's all I want to say. So the conclusion is, so don't blindly trust things without checking applicability. So previously we thought we are safe because of the Twitter mentioned there's a problem, it has been solved. But what I haven't checked is they didn't use client broker encryption. I use client broker encryption, so we are in a different scenario here. And then go back to the basic again. If you don't know what is the problem, don't just blindly throwing hypothesis. Sometimes it's way more efficient to just go back to, say, performance profiling to figure out where's actually the bottleneck is. As I've mentioned, if you are using JVM, in Graphitan 2 instances, you might have a performance problem when you are connecting over SSL, but the Amazon Corretto Crypto provider can help you with that. And in general, if you are using if you want to choose between GP2 and GP3 disk, depending on your I/O requirements. If you need a higher throughput, GP3 disks are obviously better because it can reach higher throughput. So that's all I want to say. And here are just some some references from where I get all this stuff that I put in the slides. And with that, I'm happy to answer if you have any questions.
Cool. Thank you very much, Hendra. While people are waiting to ask any questions, now is the perfect time to ask any questions if you do have any. Don't forget, just pop them on Slack or into YouTube are the two best places for that. While we wait for that, I had a question for you. So now that you've gone through all of this, and it looks like you went through quite an extensive investigation on that. So nice job on that, first of all. It's very detailed. Do you think it's worthwhile sticking with the Graphitan 2 now that you've figured out what's going on?
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, like, as the tagline mentioned, it's cheaper. It's as strong, at least, if not better. So why not?
Cool.
And yeah, but again, it checks with your implementation because it may have a similar pitfalls. So for example, if your application is written in Ruby instead, then you may need to check if that's going to be a problem.
Yep. I think maybe when switching over next time, it might be good to do a like for like and just change one variable at a time, because you did a few at once. Then there could have been a bit of a cause. But that's a good learning for everybody. When you're trying something new, don't change the whole world. Change one piece first to make sure that works before you move on to the next one.
Yep.
Okay, doesn't look like we've got any questions, which is usually a good sign that you've been pretty thorough.
Yep. Okay, thanks everyone.
Yep, no questions. Thank you very much for that, Hendra. It was really detailed, really good. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay, no worries. Thanks a lot. See you.
Okay, moving on to our second presentation of the night, and barring any more future technical difficulties, not sure what happened then. Normally, if we lose upload to YouTube, the upload graph flatlines. The upload graph looked fine, but YouTube was apparently getting no data, so I don't know. The joys of live broadcasting. Ian, are you good to go over there? All good? All right. Our second presentation of the evening is from my co-host Ian, who obviously needs no introduction. Thank you very much, Ian, for stepping in when we lost a presenter earlier today. He's going to take us through a tool called Fog. Switch over now.
Cool. Hello, everybody. And also from me, Hendra, thank you for that presentation. That was very good and interesting. My presentation is going to be shorter, doesn't have as many graphs, but let's get to it anyway. As Rob said, you probably all know me, so I don't even have an introduction slide. But I'll go through a bit of a tool I wrote that I've called Fog. So as some of you may know, probably mentioned in the past, is I'm a consultant by trade. What this means is I can go to a client, say, hello, and I'll be happy they use CloudFormation to manage their infrastructure, which is good. And then I dig deeper and I discover they don't store the parameters in files. They don't use tags on their stacks. And maybe they're deploying all of their stacks manually through the console. This is something that generally starts making me a bit unhappy because I've got opinions about things which may come as a surprise or not as much. But basically, I can't really blame clients when it's the case, because deploying CloudFormation is actually harder than it needs to be. So good examples of this is when you deploy CloudFormation, when you create a stack, you have one command and you get one set of statuses. When you update that stack, you need to use different commands and you have different statuses. If you want to use a change set, it again changes how it works. All of this is annoying and you can have things that fail. And over the years, my solution for that became a shell script, because that is how everything gets solved. And this shell script, it still works perfectly. There are a number of places where I know this is still in active use. And over the years, it's been updated, changed, deployed, and improved. Basically, though, what this shell script does is all of this. I don't know if many of you have, and this is all just by calling AWS CLI and a little bit of JQ massaging in between. Now, if you have any experience with shell scripts, you know that if you get something as complex as this, you probably shouldn't have written it as a shell script, because shell scripts are not designed to be like this, to be this complex, and it becomes really, really annoying to deal with. So what I did a while back, I finally did what I've been meaning to do for a while, and I rewrote all of this functionality into a tool, which, as I said, I called Fog. Mostly because it's a nice short term that I don't mind typing. Also because it is still related to CloudFormation. So let me just give a demo of what this does, and I'll walk you through the functionality instead of that lovely screen you just had. Here we've got the repo for Fog. I can just do it like this. Cool. Now a bit zoomed in. May not be as real in places, but here. So if I want to deploy a stack now, using super fast typing, you can see I will just run fog deploy, give the name of the stack, give the template. I call the template basic VPC. In this case, it's a YAML file. It also accepts JSON files, and there's a bunch of different extensions that it can deal with. A parameter file and various tag files. You can have multiple parameter and multiple tag files if you wish. If I run this, it will say deploying, make it a little bit bigger, and it will show me the change set. That's great. These are all changes that will happen. As this is a new stack, it will just do that. At the same time, you see here console link. If you want to have a look in the console for it, you can. Yes, I want to deploy this, and we'll get a real a live view of what's happening. This is nice if you want to follow along. Now, one of the things that you can do is do a non-interactive flag, which means it will just approve everything automatically, so you don't have to think about that yourself. I see that this particular profile of mine isn't as readable. This is supposed to be completely green, but apparently I've got some weird theme set up here. I'll run one of the other commands, which basically does the same thing in the other. Let me see if I can just zoom here. Not that one. Actually, let me just wait until this is done. You can see it's running. We get an output of everything that it found, and all good. Now I will run the same command, but with the difference being the parameter file I use. So, because I will use a private only, which will remove some of the private things, the public subnets. I'm sorry if this isn't as readable, but you'll have to, at least the colors will work properly here. Yes, I want to deploy this. As you can see, the colors are slightly different on this one. But basically, here you can see it is removing all of this, and it will then, once it's done so, show the exact, here, a green line for delete complete. If this seems wrong and the deletion should be red, this is the same colors that you get in the AWS console. Instead of using what I believe would be a more correct color, I just followed the convention so that people don't get confused about it. So this is all good. And as you see, I can update it basically with the same command, making it idempotent. If there's no change, let me actually just do that one over here so that it's more readable for everybody. Then it will say there is no change and all good, which means you can easily put this in your CI/CD pipelines and all those things. But what happens if we have one that fails? Now, one thing I haven't implemented yet is the ability, or the new feature that I mentioned earlier today, where you can continue from a rollback. What it does do, though, is when it fails, it gives it shows exactly why it failed. So it filters those messages out and shows them nicely for you. And in this case, because I had non-interactive modes, otherwise it would ask a question for this, I have it automatically delete the empty stack. One of my issues often with CloudFormation is if there was a failure with a new stack, it will leave the stack intact. Most likely this is so that you can manually go back and have a look at the failures, but it's annoying, and I suspect many of you may have run into this in the past, where you would deploy it, fix it, try to deploy it again, and then got a failure because the stack already existed and was in a non-updatable state. So this is the basic main functionality of Fog. Some other things you can do, however, is look at all of the exports in an account. This is slightly because of the way it looks. The table a bit too much zoomed in, so the table doesn't look great. But you can see, let me just run. Same thing here. You can see a little bit more readable form. If we go back here, basically, we can see that my VPC ID here is imported by the stack SG example, which is good to know. And you can also see the export names of the various. So all of these. Somewhere that I found that useful is if I come into a new account and I need to have an overview of everything that is exported, I can now just run this command and get all that information. Of course, if you want to make it a bit, if you want to see actual dependencies, you can see here that my VPC is imported by values from my VPC are imported by SG example, which means you can't delete my VPC without first deleting SG example. Now, if you hold on. Like this in a slightly more graphical way, you can do that and can export it as a .dot file, which allows you to just generate a graph like this, which doesn't look like much in this demo, but when you have a lot of stacks, it becomes a lot more interesting. And with that, I believe I will have shown this. And yes, Chris, I did write this in Go in case you're waiting for me to say that. But in the meantime, if there are questions about this, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, you can go there, download it, play around with it, let me know what works and what doesn't work, and I'll see if I can fix it. But I've been using it in its various forms for a while now, and it seems to be doing well. So thank you, and I hope this was useful to some of you. Yep. Cool. And thank you all, and Rob, all yours.
Thank you very much, Ian. That actually looks really, really cool. Especially the formatting. I think that's not often you get a command line tool that actually does that well. So that looks really good. I'm gonna have to check that out for managing all my personal accounts, because I do get lost with my stacks quite a bit. So awesome. All right, let's wrap up for the evening. If you guys do have any questions for Ian, you know where to find him. He's on Slack, and he'll be around on the YouTube chat as well if you have anything you want to ask about it. And his GitHub was github.com/Ian Swartz. Go have a look. All right, let's wrap up for the night. Oops, this way now. So our next event will be the last Wednesday of the month, back here, virtual, on YouTube, same as always, 27th of October. Big thank you again to our sponsors for the second half of 2021, CMD, Versant, and Civo. We couldn't put these events on without your support. And finally, to the virtual pub. There will be a Zoom link posted in Slack in just a couple of moments. So if you do want to hang around and have a chat, we'll be there. If not, see you next month. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Sorry for the technical problems that we seem to have encountered. I'm glad we've condensed them all into 1 month. So next month we should be fine, I think. See you next month.